Dawa nuna, dawa nunawol, yangu gulanyin nalawari donai, nanawol dawa, wangararin jinyin, maran balan barabang. This is Ngunnawal country, and today we're all meeting together on Ngunnawal country, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. We've got a great panel assembled tonight to discuss some of the challenges and difficult issues that we face at work. You can tell, probably by the look of some of us, how many years of work experience we have. And you can tell that we've got a lot of experience between us of different challenging issues. Before I introduce myself and the others, I thought I would just open the evening in prayer. Thank you, Father God, that you have given us work as part of our life and our purpose. Thank you for the privilege of working this year and last year in particular through COVID, and how grateful we are in Canberra for the smaller impact. We pray tonight for those who are still without work, and we pray in your mercy that you would help them to find work. And we pray that the words we speak tonight and the stories we share will help people as they are thinking and working through choices and decisions in their workplace. In Jesus' name, amen. So, I might start at the end of the panel, which doesn't match my notes, but I can make that work, with Michael Simon. Michael has a degree in management and a master's in theology from Regent College in Vancouver, and a Master of Commerce majoring in HR and industrial management. And he's a certified practitioner with the Australian Human Resource Institute. He has worked with companies like Fujitsu, Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, Trinity Grammar in Sydney, where he was the first professional HR appointment to a Sydney independent school, which is an interesting shift to having professional HR people as part of a school community. Canberra Grammar School, and he's now working with communities at work, so moved to the not-for-profit sector. He also serves on the Anglican Diocese Professional Standards Reference Group here, and is the chair of our parish council, the Good Shepherd. So lots of work experience. He's married to Lauren, and they have 3 children. Gail Lovick was a nurse for 30 years, and working across all different areas of midwifery, surgical nursing, community nursing, drug and alcohol rehabilitation. She had a brief time working with NGOs, sales and marketing and retail, and then through a friend and an extraordinary set of circumstances, she was able to buy a business, which she's owned for the past 23 years. She didn't write this down, but it is a fabulous shoe shop. So you should go in Monaco. And all sorts of different issues in retail and nursing, but in retail, not just with that traditional workplace structure, but suppliers, supply chains, all sorts of interesting things. Gail was married for 49 years to Bill, who passed away 4 years ago, and they have 3 children and grandchildren?
Grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
7 grandchildren.
7 grandchildren. Sandy Spark has had a 25-year career with Deloitte, starting as a cadet as soon as she finished high school, and working full-time as a financial statement auditor while completing her Bachelor of Commerce. She's continued at Deloitte and completed her Chartered Accountant qualification, and has worked with Deloitte in Toronto, in Canada, in Sydney, in Canberra, and moved to Canberra in 2011. She's worked with clients in tourism, property investment sector, commodities training and the mining sectors, and I think probably from reading this, fair to say you now specialise in your audit, you partner in the audit practice, and risk management, and work now with not-for-profit and for purpose sector, energy, water, ag sector, and government departments now in Canberra, and agencies. Is retiring very soon from Deloitte to pursue some new opportunities with audit and risk committees. So that's an exciting new phase as well. Part of her role at Deloitte, as well as risk and audit, has been working with the graduate program, which is about 700 grads each year, so oversight of that is a massive task, and leading Deloitte's Inspiring Women program, probably part of the early inception of that, in the early 2000s before these things were trendy, and worked on Deloitte's diversity strategy, and many hours recruiting and mentoring and coaching individuals, and is married with 2 kids. I'm Lara Gleben. I have an arts law degree, and I was a grad at the Department of Immigration in Canberra many moons ago. I know a lot of you, watching online, are grads in the last year or two. I was a grad a long time ago. I was at immigration for about 17 years. One of my career highlights was a posting to London for 3 years during that time. I've spent most of my career in policy. I've dabbled in legal areas a few times, and it's enjoyable, but I'm always drawn back to policy. A few years ago, I transferred to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, where I worked for 2 years, 2 budget cycles. That was more than enough. And as well as shadowing immigration portfolios there, I worked on disaster recovery and the National Redress Scheme for Institutional Child Sexual Abuse, which was a pretty tough gig. And I've now spent 3 years at the National Indigenous Australian Agency, where I've run the Indigenous employment programs for Indigenous job seekers. And I'm also married to Michael, but not just Michael, and I have 2 kids. So, just to get things started tonight, I thought each member of the panel could just share a brief story of one of the toughest things they've had to do in the workplace, and how being a Christian impacted that tough situation. Maybe we'll go in reverse. Sandy,
Sure.
would you like to kick it off?
Sure. So several years ago, not too many, but a Canberra-based experience, I had the, difficult task of coaching out of our business, or encouraging someone out of our business that I had hired. That involved a whole bunch of consultation with my partners, with our HR professionals. It involved claims of bullying against me, which impact our partnership as a whole. But equally, one of the things that we try and do as we coach people to leave our business or encourage them to leave is to, again, reflect on their own behaviours, their own fit for our work. And this particular individual did not have the mental capacity to actually do that at the time. So, personally, that was an incredibly confronting moment when someone that I had believed in and had brought into our business turned out to not be a good fit. It's confronting. My job is to serve my clients, and I had put this person on site with one of our clients, and she... the client had called me to say that she was underperforming and she needed to go, so I felt like I'd let my client down. And then personally as well, and my husband will testify to many sleepless nights, many tears, many reflections on emails that were sent or text messages as well. These experiences, fortunately, they make us stronger, but and we learn. I think it's only through some of these bad experiences that we learn how to do things better. A really difficult moment that has defined, I think, some of my leadership post that. Yeah.
Very different scenario, I guess, from Sandy's, but I think for me one of the most difficult things was having to leave a profession that I really loved because of an injury. I think this happens to so many people, that an injury comes, whether it's mental health injury, a physical injury, that you then have to realise that something that you really love doing is no longer available to you. To try and turn that around and to grieve through that process as well, and find other things that can fill the void that's left when you leave something that you really love to do. And in that, I think my reliance on God as my refuge and strength and leader was really never more paramount, I think, than it was at that moment, to be led into a very different pathway that enabled me to see that there were more talents that I had that I hadn't used. And so it was really, in some ways, a really grieving process, a really sad process, but it was a really liberating process too that allowed me to move on. So it's not necessarily something that I've done with other people, but it was certainly a personal difficulty for me. Mm.
And I think from my perspective, it's probably situations where I've had to deal with senior management and raise issues of real concern, but they weren't ready to hear the information. And so working through that process has always been rather tricky, and you've got to go on the journey and keep it at pace, but at the same time, senior management often need time to catch up and work with those processes. So I think they've probably been my most challenging moments in careers. Sorry about this. Yeah.
Mm. And for me personally, two sort of similar but situations. One is when I've had to manage a bully, someone who's been bullying other people in the team. It's a very challenging situation to work through that situation with people, and related to have been bullied myself just once in a long and happy career full of excellent managers, but was bullied, and the difficulty that you face professionally but also personally, the sleepless nights, as Sandy said, that goes along with that. There's doubt in your own abilities and performance, and the tension in the team. And as a Christian, the two things that were really difficult about that was that I didn't necessarily handle very well all the time, is keeping away from gossip about those situations, and not wanting people to hear my side of the story all the time and make sure that they knew I was in the right and everyone else was in the wrong, and really conduct yourself with discretion and integrity in that situation. That I found hard. And the second aspect is to work through forgiveness in those situations at work, and maintain the ability to have working relationships in those situations. That was really challenging, and I think, just illustrates how forgiveness is something we need to face and tackle in our workplaces, not just we often think of it as our family or good friends who've hurt us, but it's often work that's really wounds us. Colleagues and managers, and how we work through that forgiveness and demonstrate that, sometimes well and sometimes not so well, depending. I didn't say at the beginning, I'm surprised Ryan or Josiah hasn't been waving me down, but we have a QR code that you can scan and put in questions, especially if you're at home. You can go onto Slido and add questions. We'll have time at the end of the night for people in the room to ask questions, but if you want to put them in anonymously, you go onto Slido or scan that QR code and you put in passcode 725027, and you'll be able to add some questions, and we're hoping to have time for those. We had a couple come through this week, which we'll address, but feel free to add some other questions as we go. So the first topic we wanted to cover this evening is ambition versus humility, I think is a good way to put it. Can Christians be ambitious, high-performing? Can we want a promotion? Can we want more money? Can we want the next job? And how do we balance that with a servant heart and humility and staying as Jesus, at the bottom of the pile? So I'm interested in these answers. Michael, would you like to tell us how we can walk that line?
I'll give it a go. I think it's interesting that we pit the two against one another, isn't there? We've got ambition and we've got humility. And I'm not sure that needs to be the case. Ambition, unfortunately, for those of us who grew up in the 80s, know the kind of greed is good from the Gordon Gekko movie. I think we've got an idea of that sort of toxic idea of ambition. But in a sense, ambition is just wanting to do something better and higher from where you are at present. And in a sense, that reflects God. God wants us to be ambitious in that sense, and he's ambitious for us. So ambition in itself, I don't think is a bad thing. Humility, and I think, is also something that needs to be considered deeply in that context. I think to be truly humble, you need to know the skills that you've got. You need to be confident in those skills and be thankful to God for the skills that you've been given. But then you have a choice of what you do with those skills. And you have to choose how you're going to use them, what is the best use of those skills. And then I think there's a third element, and that is otherness in terms of humility. And so we have choices all along the way. And the person I found really helpful in this area of humility is John Dixon and his book in Humilitas. And I would recommend that book. He really sort of digs into examples of humility in the workplace. So I think we don't have to play them against one another. We need to avoid toxic forms of ambition and non-genuine forms of humility, but be able to bring them together to be true servants.
Great.
For sort of picking up on that idea of, so how do we chase our ambitions, or how do we fulfill our ambitions at work? I think many of us work in a context, and certainly the context I've worked in, where we need to set our career plans. We need to, when we go for a job interview, we have to talk about our capabilities or our abilities. I think key things there are things like being aware of what your strengths and your weaknesses are. It is not bad to acknowledge your strengths or your weaknesses. Lara was sharing before that in interview panels, and these things come out anyway. It's pretty easy to tell, So I think there is a certain level of, as a Christian, being honest about our strengths and honest about our development areas. There's an openness or a humility in seeking jobs or work that is suited to us, or that we're interested, in pursuing. I think keeping those things in mind and dealing with our career plans with that insight, that end in mind, that perhaps there isn't going to be a next year, but that's not the be-all and end-all of why I'm here.
And one of the questions that came through this week was specifically that job interview situation. How do we manage that, and how do we not see it as boastful?
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. It's one's being honest. One's describing one's capability, and I think there's a certain level of don't lie, right? That's not boasting. And I don't think it's boasting in an ungodly way either.
Yeah, great. I think one of the things we talked to in terms of biblical figure is looking at the life of Joseph, and he wasn't what you'd think of as ambitious. He ended up in a lot of his jobs by accident and design, obviously by God. But in terms of he wasn't ambitious, but he was certainly powerful in many different positions, and how he used that power for good and for God's story, and for being part of the way God was working in those workplaces that he was in the household, and essentially the most senior public servant in Egypt, and how he was able to be humble in that position of incredible power and do so much good. And not to squander the gifts and opportunities we have, sort of bloom where we're planted, really, in the way that Joseph did, and make the most of the talents we've been given. Along a similar line, what do we do about money? What do we do about wanting to run a successful, profitable business, or wanting a pay rise, or handling a negotiation of your salary in the private sector. I'm a public servant, I don't have to do that. Everyone knows, you can look up what I earn. What are some of the different ways we handle that? And Gail, maybe you'd like to start in that private sector.
But of course in retail, one would imagine, for obvious reasons, we are there to make a profit. We're not in a retail business to make a loss. We are there to work hard and to make it a profitable business. But profits are not necessarily a bad thing. In our business world, we are enabled by profit making to pay back into our community. And a number of small businesses that I'm familiar with, including my own, are very keen to ensure that we pay back into the community that enables us to make a profit, and to pay back into local organisations that are needing funding to help various others. And so the whole raison d'etre is, yes, to make money, but what do you do with that at the end? That's the most important thing. How do we disseminate what we make in our profit? And how do we use that wisely? And I think that's something that I've really been very grateful to be able to do, that we've been very blessed in the business that I own, and it has enabled us to go and support various other, particularly NGOs and other organisations in our community for the work that they are endeavouring to do. So I think it's really important to not see profit as you said, the be-all and end-all of everything, but a way to enable others and to empower others in our society and in our community. Mm-hmm.
I think we can think of our salaries in the same way.
Sure.
So, I'm seeking to earn or be paid an amount of money that is fit and proper reward for the work that I'm doing. And then that enables me to, whether you call it tithe or to give back to the church. I know very early in my career and my husband's career, we both made a choice to stay in the commercial world and to not follow ministry training or other things like that. And we actually, with the advice of a minister who was a dear friend of ours, who said someone has to help pay for all of these other people to go to ministry, going through college or for our churches to work. And we have that ability, and Michael does it now, but to bring those skills that we learn in a corporate sense or in our policies, in a sense, whatever it is, to our churches as well. So I think as we look at money, there's how you use your money, and then when it comes to negotiating salaries for those of us that are in that position, I actually find it really helpful to think through what is the value that I bring to the organisation, and I think that's actually it's quite it's quite uplifting, or it's quite a powerful thing to actually think through what is my organisation's values, and then what's my part to play in those values, and therefore if they match up, then I should be duly or rewarded for that. So they're things that I think through.
I just add there too that it's as a business owner and an employer, I'm very cognizant that my workers, my people, my colleagues, people who work with me are remunerated in a really positive way. That the worker is worthy of his hire, paid for his hire. And so I think that's a really important thing to understand, how you care for your workers, what you do with them, ensure that they have the correct salary and more, if you're able. It's always been a policy of mine that if I can actually pay more, then I will. My workers come with all sorts of talents and are part of a team. We work together. They bring all sorts of wonderful talent to that, and they are working hard. So I think that as an employer, recognition of that is also very important when it comes to their remuneration as well.
And it breeds loyalty, doesn't it? You said a number of your staff have worked at the shop for...
Yes, I've had staff that have worked for me for 17 years, which has just been fantastic. It's an enabling, empowering thing as we all work together. I've never been, I don't think that you can stand at the head of the boat without knowing how to row the boat. And I call it a bicycle. The Escala team is a bicycle, and each one of us has a valuable part to play, because if the pedal drops off or the handlebars fall, then the business fails. And it's really important that we all work together. And I'm no less a worker than anything else.
And I think when we were talking about this, we were thinking of Lydia in the Bible too. And again, look, there's plenty of hard-working examples in the Bible, but Lydia's example to us, and Proverbs is full of wisdom about using money well and not focusing on the amount, but on how you're using it. The next sort of set of questions we thought we'd looked at is some of the difficult decisions we have to make at work, and particularly what you can do if you're asked to do something that you think is unethical or is a challenge to your core beliefs or dodgy, and how you can handle that. In the public service, it's quite an interesting scenario with those sorts of situations. The first thing to say is there really is something different. There's a difference between being asked to do something that is unlawful, if you're an accountant being asked to cook the books, or to turn a blind eye, to ignore something that went wrong and put it in the bottom drawer. There are situations we're in where it's really clear that we're being asked to do something wrong, and the hard part's just knowing you know what you need to do, and the hard part is finding that support and working out how to do it, how to say no to the boss, or how to leave the organisation, or how to talk to a colleague or another manager to get some advice. I have myself put in complaints and put in anonymous dob-ins, I guess, in the situation. Whistleblowing, that's the proper term now. And those are difficult things to do. But I have also actively said no. And the good thing about the public service is they can't fire you. You're more likely to get fired if you do the wrong thing, but there's no other way you can get fired. So you can say no and just, they shuffle you sideways, as always. So I have, it's not easy, but I have had to say I'm not going to do that. And but take a manager on side. I've spoken to someone else first about that to get that support. More difficult, or maybe just as difficult, is in the public service we're often asked to do things that we don't agree with or don't sit with our values or who we've voted for. And the first thing there that it comes to, the sort of a framework for me, is that Australia has a really fantastic democracy and a very strong public service, and our role is to do what the government wants us to do. And none of you voted for me. None of you really care what I think about climate change or Indigenous employment. You vote for someone who tells me what I should do. And it's difficult in Canberra because most of us vote Labor, especially if you're in the public service. And at the moment, we're in the middle of a long stretch of a Liberal government. So we know that there's going to be lots of policies that we don't agree with, either in a big way or a small way. We can't leave the public service every time there's a Liberal government in, or equally, if you vote Liberal, you can't leave the public service every time Labor comes in. You're implementing policies that have been determined at the ballot box or by that government. The trickiest thing about that is still deciding what your own radar is and your internal radar, when it is just too much, and what you are prepared to do and what you can't live with As I've said, worked at immigration for many years and tourist visas and student visas, and I moved, all very interesting and non-controversial, or controversial in their own ways, small ways. Then moved into refugee policy, which is very tough, and then had the election in 2013 where the Liberals came in with temporary protection visas as a really clear election promise. And our entire team decided to stay and continue working on it. And there were a lot of things that were really tough, but it was also one of the most rewarding teams, such a fantastic boss, which makes all the difference, a senior manager. Frank and fearless advice, really thinking through, challenging ourselves. Why is it necessary that TPVs are wrong? Maybe there are some really good arguments for them. How can we find ways to ensure that the way that they're implemented is done professionally and with compassion and to the best standard it can be? But I had my own limits, and personally I had thought I could never work in the detention area of immigration, and that was a personal choice, but I still recognise you need Christians in that area too, implementing immigration detention in a compassionate and kind way and influencing the people around them. Being a Christian in any workplace and thinking about the way you affect the colleagues and people that you work with. So, and after a couple of years, anyway, cutting along a short story long, as my husband says, I also then had a shelf life. There was only so many years I could do refugee policy until it got too hard. Things shifted, management shifted, that my excellent manager left. Some of the internal policies changed, and one clear sign when it's time to go is when you're in the car crying at the end of the day. That's a great internal radar that enough is enough. You should probably leave before that happens, just another work tip. But there is a point at which the policies that you're working on conflict with your own values too much, and it is time to go, and you have to be able to recognise that. I mean, I feel right now for people working on climate change policy, most of whom have got environmental science degrees and huge amounts of expertise. Imagine the briefing they've just written for the climate change conference and just how tough things are. But that's part of being a public servant. Anyway, that's a long answer to that. But I think it's really important to think about in Canberra is what you're prepared to do and what is too hard, and to be thinking and praying about when's the right time to go and when it's really important to stay and be a Christian in those tough environments and be a voice of compassion and kindness and ethics in tough situations. I think Gail was going to give a completely different perspective on some of this.
Yes, public servants is not my area, of course, but there are moral and ethical compass that we work with generally in any of our work that we do. And with me, it's very much about the supply chain. I have very strong feelings about how people do their work, how work is fair, how workers are treated. And one of the wonderful things that I have been able to do in the work that I do is that I have been able to travel to factories and to meet with workers, to see how they work. And that's really important to me. I had a situation right back in about probably in the second year, where I was working with a group of people here. They had a lot of manufacture being done offshore. I was dismayed to learn that one was going to Europe, taking the designs of a fairly illustrious and well-known designer and travelling to China and having those things made in China. So that was quite distressing for me because I'd worked quite closely with these people and had trusted that what they were doing was okay. It was a large part of the collection that I put together, and in the end I had to say, this is not right and I'm not doing it. And that took a lot of guts, prayer and determination then to turn around and find other ways of putting those collections together in a much more ethical way. And I'm very grateful, really, that was a huge lesson to me, because I think that you do have to take standpoints, and that goes back to my earlier point about profitability. It's not just about profitability. It's how you get to be profitable, what you do, what that journey looks like, who you engage with, who you're prepared to engage with, and what you're prepared to do. I think it's really important to have that, really strong ethical compass. Yeah.
Anything else to add? No?
I was just thinking of a situation some years back where the CEO of the organisation hadn't treated someone so well, and it actually ended up in a legal matter. And I was very aware that they hadn't been treated well. And I thought, how am I going to deal with this? The CEOs, they could get rid of me pretty quickly. So I thought and prayed about it. So what I did is the CEO asked me to deal with it with a solicitor, and I did. And I was just really honest with the solicitor, and I said, can we talk in confidence? Here's what happened. Here's how the person was treated badly. They needed to be dismissed at the time, but they were treated badly in the process. And the solicitor was very helpful. He said, okay, well, that's really good to know about that, because we can now deal with that in a legal way. But not only that, I'm going to go and talk to your boss as a solicitor with the facts that I've got in front of me, and it won't be coming from you, but just to say that the process fell down here, here, and here. So we fixed the problem, and it was by getting someone else involved who could help out. So I think sometimes you need to be creative with some of these problems. They're not always simple. Organisations do often have resources you can go and tap into, like employee assistance programs. Find one that works for you. Not every employee assistance program is great, but a lot of organisations have more than one that you can go to. You can go and talk to someone outside of the business, and they can give you advice without being in the heat of the moment.
Better than crying in the car at the end of the day. Get some
advice. You can
advice.
do that as well.
That's right, let it out. Changing tack completely, another issue that's quite tricky is should we be working on the Sabbath or on Christian holidays, and should we be working huge hours every night for months on end? How do we square that away with our Christian values and our time that's precious to us for other things? So, Sandy or Gail, you're going to go first?
Well, I guess, in retailing it's about Sunday trading, isn't it? What you think about that and what you don't. My two areas of work, of course, as a nurse for many years, working on a Sunday was something that we did. We worked on a weekend. Hospital didn't work from Monday to Friday. But that was part of our service. It is a tricky one to negotiate in your own head sometimes, but you're part of a workforce that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so it didn't seem to me that when I was working as a nurse, it was much more a service orientation. In retailing, it's cut and dried for me. There's no trading on a Sunday. And that was something that we as a family stood very strongly with. And I'm quite happy when people say, what do you mean you don't trade on a Sunday? No, Sunday is the day I go to church. We have family day, we have friends, we meet together. No, I don't trade on a Sunday. I've been in the very fortunate position, I think, of not having a store that has ever been in a mall or a shopping centre, and that is a very different scenario for people who have their stores in those places, where you are locked in to trading in the hours that they want you to trade in. So I think I've been really fortunate, but our store is closed on Christian holidays, and I've been very strong about that. I make no excuses for that at all, and it has made not one jot of difference.
So I was happy to let Gail go first. She's very passionate about that. I'm perhaps less passionate about it. Look, a really complex question. Clearly, consulting, the work that I do is the service industry. The work that we have always done, I'm not my own boss. I am, at the moment, I'm the whim of someone in the public service that wants to finish work at 5 and then says, "You're the consultant, you'll do it by 5 o'clock tomorrow morning," so that it's on my desk at 9. And look, many of us in the public service, if you're working around certainly surge or ministerials, you've done the hours. There is an element, I think, of our work, which is we're in a place to work, to do the job. It is our responsibility, and I actually think as a Christian, it's important to me that I acquit myself well in doing my work. And I would like to take pride in it, and I don't mean that in a non-Christian way or an arrogant way, but I firmly believe, and in fact I enjoy serving my clients and reaching an outcome that is good, not that is slapdash or last minute. So as a consequence, over the course of my career, I've done it all. Worked weekends, I've worked public holidays. We all actually shared the worst two. Good Friday, like Easter is just a shocker. And having to work to get something out, whether it's ministry, and Christmas. And in fact, I've, in terms of, yes, I feel resentful about working on those days. And then I feel even more resentful that these are Christian holidays. These are the one day a year that is meant for me. Right? This is a public holiday that you all get, but this day is meant for me. And I have to pray about that. I have to repent for those feelings as well. But equally would like the work to be done and to be done to a really good standard. So I do think it's complex. I think they are, I guess, how do I reconcile that in my own mind? We talked about the context of rest. For not a Sabbath of Sunday is not going to work for all of us in all of our roles, but the importance of having time to rest, just like God did in Genesis. And so that, for me, whether I think about the week and I say, well, what day of rest or what time of rest, maybe it's a Wednesday this week instead of a Sunday or whatever. Maybe it's actually time away from my family, so it's a holiday on my own, which I've never had, just to be clear. 2 days away, maybe. but I think thinking about the context, what is rest for me so that I can do the Lord's work in my place? And that may not be weekly, it may not be daily, it may be just over the course of a year or over the course of a career, studying and work and all the rest of it that comes along. Do you want to add into it?
All I'd say to that is that I think we are in a very changing world, and the Sabbath, as we've known it, is very much of a Christian tradition. But of course we do meet on Sunday, which is not dedicated to the Christian God, which is a little reminder that it hasn't always been Christian. And I think what that means is that we need to think as churches about more creative ways of meeting at other times during the week when we can. Sunday's a great day. We should endorse rest. If we can make it on a Sunday, that's great. I love what Gail's done in her business. I wish I had that power to do that, but we can't. I think we need to keep thinking about more creative ways that we can meet.
Yeah, there's really something important in the model, the biblical model of working for 6 days and taking a seventh, building a pattern of rest into the week and not focusing so much on it being a Sunday, but making sure it's a priority, but consciously built into the pattern of the week or the month. Sometimes it can't be built into the week. Young parents can't build much rest into their weeks, but how can we consciously build in a period, and how can we double down the rest after a massive period of work, and looking after your team and your staff after those times as well, making sure that when you've done those 3 or 4 months of every weekend and every evening for 3 or 4 months, how are we all then taking a proper break?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably just add, I'm very fortunate position of having an employer, or I'm a partner in a firm. We are employers, but where that discussion is quite an open discussion now. And I think as we look at what does work look like, having dealt with the pandemic, we have certainly made allowances for our staff to have additional days off or whenever that suits them, or to restructure their working day or week. I think that's going to become more of the reality, certainly in the private sector. Whether it creeps into the bastion of the public sector, I'm less confident. but I think there is something about what does work look like, and I think now, and a number of people that are listening or here will be part of that dialogue. We actually have a fantastic opportunity to shape what does work look like for me, and what does rest look like for me.
Just really enjoying all these articles about the 4-day week.
Yeah.
That's taken off.
So I tried working part-time, it didn't work for me.
No, but if everybody's doing it, that's different. Yeah, I agree, part-time is really hard. One specific angle that someone asked us to cover, I think, really is when you're doing those extra hours, not paid and not enjoyable. Sometimes there's a buzz. Like sometimes you're on a project in a team and you're all in, but sometimes it's a slog and you're the only one that the team that the boss is asking to stay back, as you said, or everyone's relying on the consultant to do it. Has anyone got some tips for that conversation with their manager about that? How to actively reduce that workload?
Do you want to give the technically correct answer?
I would be talking to your manager about well-being and psychological health. It's a really important part of the workplace now. It's very much part of work covers brief, whereas in the past it was more focused on physical elements of work. There's as much about psychological elements in the workplace. So management have a responsibility to uphold your welfare under the Work Health and Safety Acts in Australia. And so I think there is a responsibility for the manager to look after you. So there's always an avenue to go in there and talk about that. How you do it is another question. But I think that there is that underlying knowledge from most managers that they need to be considering your health and safety.
And so often I think sometimes it's just being honest. I was thinking about taking these things to friends or to Bible study to pray for you, and I feel like quite often work issues don't come up in Bible studies, or perhaps just some of the ones that I've been in, where there's lots of other things going on in our life, and again it's not wanting to gossip about things at work, but seeing, having a group of Christian friends or mentors that you feel these issues, they're important to God, and they're a huge part of our life, and we shouldn't just be praying for our non-Christian friends or for somebody's illness or the issue at church. Those obviously are important, but we should see these work issues as things that we're taking to people and saying, can you help me? I have to have this horrible conversation with my boss. I want to reduce my hours. How do I do it? Can you pray for me? And feel that is, these work issues are not separated from our spiritual life, that work is an integral part of our spiritual life. Okay.
I was just going to say too, our work world is an enormous part of our life. That's where we do spend the most part of our life. So I think your comment is valid, Lara, that to bring those things to prayer are really, really important. Yeah, really important.
And then I'm going to jump in just as those of us who are managers of other people. I think it's really important to create an environment that is safe. We talk about psychological safety, but I've had an instance just in the last 2 weeks where one of my senior managers just shot me a really quick text message and said, I'm really worried about another member in our team. I think he's burnt out. Can we have a conversation? And that triggered for me, because I care about my team. It's important to me that all of our team are well. But that triggered a number of conversations, both with the people that the teams that I was running, that he was working in, my fellow partners, and they were conversations about how could we best support this individual. And the conversation that I had with him, as a friend and as a long-time boss, I think he just needed to be heard. And I think then, we've all got that responsibility. It might sound trite, but to ask the person next to us, how are you doing? And that's part of creating a really safe culture in our workplace and giving people then the ability to raise any concerns that they've got.
We've got 2 more questions that have come in during the week already, and then we'll try and have some time for the questions that have been coming in through the night and from the audience. So, Michael, perhaps you would cover some tips for managing underperforming staff. So not the overachiever that's there till 11 p.m. for the last 3 months, but the one that left at 4 and didn't pull their weight. How can you handle that as a Christian manager or colleague?
Well, I think the first thing is to have the conversation. I think there's a great fear often in workplaces about having conversations. And this is one of the things I've had to work with senior managers, particularly in workplaces. They say to me, you can't have that sort of conversation, it's unkind. And I say to them, well, let me tell you what's unkind. Unkind is when everyone's talking about this person, when this person hasn't had the opportunity to improve their work, and then you turn up and dismiss them. So the first thing is, the number one bit of advice is have that conversation. The next thing is work out how you're going to have that conversation. And we're all different, and we all respond differently, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have to work through that by making mistakes. And I think the best things I've learned have often been through making mistakes. But how do you react when you're in a situation that you're finding uncomfortable? Do you get nervous? Do you shake? Do you get flushed? Does energy go to your head? Everyone's a little bit different from that. And knowing yourself is really, really important, because you need to be able to settle yourself and say, okay, the very best I can do for this person, the way I can serve this person is to take the lead in this situation and talk to them about the situation and the issues that are on the table as they are, and work out how we can move forward from there. I think it's so easy to run away from situations. And I've found it, even in my own teams that I've run, it's so tempting not to say something, but then everything builds up around and you get a disaster. So I guess that's the number one tip there. The Fair Work legislation, I think, is actually very helpful for most people. It's a little bit different in the public service because there's a Public Service Act which guides how you do performance management. But in private industry, in its varying forms, there are criteria under the Unfair Dismissal Code which I think come from a very good philosophical base. The problem often when we just dismiss someone too quickly is that we haven't gone through the process of our own self-reflection in the workplace. And there may be things that management are doing that has created an environment where that person can't flourish. And by going through a process with a person, that may come out. Not always, but the aim in performance management is to get the person back up to performing in their workplace, in this very specific situation, to the best of their ability, so that you don't have to move to that next stage and terminate. Now, having said that, there are some people who genuinely just aren't able to make those changes and make the adaptation. So there is a place for termination in the workforce, but it's a matter of working through it in a good and proper way.
And I take a HR professional with me. My number one rule is don't ever do that conversation alone, is have someone else sitting next to me. And that's actually both from a record-keeping perspective, because when I'm in the heat of the moment, I cannot take notes of that meeting, and I will need that if it ever goes to the Fair Work Commission, but also from just a support perspective, both emotional and physical, visual.
I was just thinking of a situation that I'd dealt with in the last 12 months, and there'd been terrible things go wrong on all sides of this person's employment, and there'd been mistakes made to this person, and this person had made mistakes as well. So I went to this meeting, and everyone had an opinion on it, and I said, we'll deal with it. So we brought this person in, and we listened, and I said, look, I think you've made a mistake. I think I'm going to probably give you a formal warning. I'm not going to make that decision today. But if I do, let's make this be a line in the sand. And from this point, let's try and reset your work relationship so that we can get you going again. That person has reset. Sometimes people just need the support and the opportunity to change.
Which is grace, right? That's grace in
Right,
our workplace.
right, yeah.
It's taking the way we give people a second chance here to do that at work and to have that attitude. Again, not separating how we do things at work from how we do treating people everywhere else in our life.
Yeah. And sometimes
it's a great
it's good
example.
to have colleagues speak up. I often give the example of at work when my second daughter was very young. I was getting up in the night with her regularly, and I thought I was doing great. So 3 weeks down, I'd been up every night thinking, I'm really doing this. Anyway, someone sent me an email at work and accused me of bringing down a whole system. I got on the phone and I let them have it. And one of my colleagues turned to me and he said, mate, I'm taking you out for coffee. Yeah. And I think that's the sort of relationship we can have with one another. We need to be able to listen to others saying, you haven't dealt with that well. You can. Come on, let's go out. Let's reset it and go again. Excellent.
Another question that was sent in, completely different. What about Christians joining the union at work? Especially if the union is fighting government policy, and as Christians there's lots of Romans about submitting to government. And so, Gail, I think you have some views on this?
Yes, it's really an interesting one. Actually, never a union person was I. But there comes a time sometimes when you do have to step up to the plate. This is when I was back in my nursing profession, and we were going through a lot of changes with restructuring strategy and also wage restructuring, and I was in the private hospital sector at the time. Lots of chat in the tea room, etc. It looked as though the private hospital sector was actually going to miss out on any of this restructure. And it was really important for career pathing that, you know, they were part of this restructuring. So there's chat around in the tea room, you know, but this is terrible, and who's going to do something, and who's going to do something, and, you know, so then we get to management and somebody's got to do something. Well, who's going to do something? And I looked around and I'm the only one standing, wasn't I? Suddenly I became the union member. I ended up, you know, in Fair Work with branch councils and was able to actually negotiate for that private hospital sector. But it's about a situation that occurs where you believe that there is justice to be served and a position to be taken so that there is fairness for all. And it was a fantastic outcome, and I was really pleased, but I was also really pleased to shed my union cloak and go back to what I was doing before. But there is a time, I think, when that is appropriate to serve those various elements, I think.
Sometimes it's speaking up for the disenfranchised, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very definitely. I think you really have to look at that and say, well, where is the fairness in this? If everyone out there is gaining and where, you know, people who are doing a very similar work are going to lose, that's just not on. So, yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that many of the original unions had Christian roots. They were for... And many of the reasons we've got our work week like it is because of unions. I've never been part of a union. I've dealt with unions a lot. And like any industry, you get some great unions who are really supportive of their workers and are really trying to do the right thing. And then there's others who just do the wrong thing. So
it did make me think that it's a question that relates to how, as Christians, we engage in the political sphere, and it did make me think that might be a good topic to look at a Shepherd seminar for next year, not just in unions, but how we engage in all sorts of aspects of political life as Christians. So maybe Ryan and I will park that one and see if we can unpack that next year. And if anyone would like to be a guest speaker or on a panel unpacking political life and Christians, come and see Ryan or I. I think we might take some questions now. So if anyone in here, or there's someone online, but anyone here first want to have a question?
How about, I'll jump in with a question from online and then we'll kind of take someone from on the floor. I'll start with one here. How does one balance being loyal to your career choice with being part of an unhealthy or toxic work environment? How do you make those decisions?
Who'd like to? So loyalty when it's toxic. So where's the limits of loyalty, really?
And loyalty to a career. So you've chosen a particular career and you're
Yeah.
kind of dedicated. So it's not just...
That's toxic. Do you want to start?
I can start. I think it's like any relationship, isn't it? You need to work out whether it's being beneficial to your well-being, and is there the possibility of that relationship and that workplace getting better than what it is? And if there is no possibility, then there's a good option to go and work elsewhere. We're lucky in Australia. There are lots of workplaces. Unemployment is very, very low, and the first thing I'd want to say to a person who is struggling with that issue is you've got choices, and consider it. There are places where you need to hang in there, because it may feel like the world is falling in on you, but if you just hang in there and you have longevity and just stability and you can offer that and it's okay for your mental health, keep going. So I think you've got to juggle all of those things. But going back to one of the comments of the panel before, talk to your friends and those who know you well and can provide you good counsel. I think we need to be working more and more in community in that way, having trusted friends.
I wonder too, especially in today's world, in terms of it, the whole, it's a sort of question relating to the culture, not just of one organisation, but that particular career choice, that particular work stream. But I wonder if it's a little bit like Gail's story about supply chains, that there might be ways to... usually now there's somebody who's set up their business specifically to be ethical against all of that. So I wonder if there are ways to really seek that out and get assistance with that. I know even with shopping there's websites to look on to see where we should be purchasing and where we shouldn't, who's involved in the slave trade and who's being really careful and ethical, and pay a little more for, or a lot more, but pay for a product. I wonder, again, this... in Canberra, you can just use word of mouth in the public service to find out where the toxic cultures are. But in the private sphere, maybe, I don't know. Is there ways to stay in your career but find an organisation with a different approach?
There's always another employer. I do think. I mean, there is two parts to that question. I think one is, is my career choice, is that sitting well with me now? Is it still ethical? Does it demand anything of me that is inconsistent with my faith? Then there is the question of my workplace, and yes, there is always another employer, or there's always another group within your same organisation, and ways of raising with others, which parts of that organisation are ethical or not. So I would try and look at it through that lens first, I think, or those two lenses first, and then try and think of why has God placed me here? What is my role? And I've been very fortunate to not be part of, sort of had either issue in my careers.
Also, maybe looking at, again, today we can look at our transferable skills, going from nursing to retail, using different gifts, but using some of the same, highly organised and...
Well, nursing is a fantastic profession that really allows you to work in almost anything. It's relational, and that's what I think our work world is and should be. It's building relationships. It's about relationships. It's about the relationship you have with your co-workers, your colleagues, your suppliers. It is about constantly working at those things and being anxious to have good relationships with people. And I think that makes a huge difference. It must make a difference in terms of the toxicity that could or might exist in a workplace. And I think it's really important. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, it's about relationship and how we build it and what we do with it.
So I have two things. One's a question, one's more just general. I think throughout that I can relate to Gail the most because I work for a small businessman in the trade, so it's very chaotic at times and unpredictable, not very consistent. But for Gail in particular, how many chances do you give an employee sometimes? Because I'm now in a position where I think I was joking with a mate ages back with who cost our boss the most money. Because I was stuffing up on a regular basis, but he has continued to keep me on. So that must be worth it. Like, I must have something else that I'm proving on a day-to-day basis that he wants to keep me out for and like learn from mistakes and keep going. But like now being in a position where now I feel like I have to stick it out because he's given me those repeated chances on improving and continuing on.
As an employer, I sit very happily with where Michael is in talking to people, in sitting down and working out what it is that your goals are and what you want to achieve in that job. And even in my small business, there are, people who work with me who do have goals and ambitions. I think, the generally accepted thing these days, and you could refute or not, Michael, the fact that there's a 3... you give 3 warnings and what you do with that. I haven't ever done that, to be truthful. But as an employer, I would think that you would be trying to really seek what your talents are and what part of the bicycle you actually are, what part of the team you fit into. And if you don't feel that you're part of that team, then maybe that's another conversation of where you think. Have I understood you properly?
Yeah, like with like small companies in particular, there's ups and downs, and whether you try and figure out, do I quit now, go on to something potentially more steady, or do I stick it out and hope that the vision that my boss sees is going to come true? And it's just be better.
Well, it's very difficult in small business at the moment, having weathered 2 years of COVID, where there's a whole heap of uncertainty and not a great deal of ability to plan forward, for we don't know just exactly what will happen. I mean, case in point for me is having bought collections into this summer 12 months ago, never believing for one moment that I would be shut down for 3 months. So those are the very particular and difficult things where it comes to planning a business and having a vision for your business. And if your employer has been happy to have you there, then he obviously sees some potential in you for that business. Is that a happy situation for you or no?
It definitely makes me feel good that because I was because he started it on his own. I was the first apprentice that he employed, so I've been there
for a long time,
almost 3 years now. It does, obviously there is a good feeling about that, and having gone through 4 other people come through and be like, nah, that's not the work ethic that I want, or such and such, but. Yeah, it is still one of those tricky thoughts where you're just like, you're still annoying me a little bit, but...
No one's perfect. No, we all annoy each other, and I'm very guilty of that too. I'm sure I annoy my staff immensely sometimes, and we did have a situation yesterday where I probably did annoy my staff member immensely. So, repent of that and hope for forgiveness and move on.
You probably don't tell us where we're working on the morning at 6 in the morning. You're just like, when do I wake up? Should I just try and get ahead of him?
I think part of your question goes to how do we leave a workplace, especially if it's a happy one, just to take the next opportunity. And that's...
before you burn out or something.
Yeah, that's in any job. I've had that before. I've shared a story tonight when I've left when it started happy and got unhappy, but I've left really happy jobs just to take the next opportunity for growth. And that can be harder. And I think it's the way that that's done, the same as everything, the same as what Michael said, is I hope that most of the times I've done that, and I've always stayed in a job for 2 or 3 years, or almost always, that boss would take me back if I wanted to a few years later, but also take me back if the new opportunity fell down. And that's about leaving really well and maintaining those relationships. And a good boss will love to have you back. And you go somewhere else and get new skills and bring those new skills back. And I've said to staff members, I've actively said to great staff members, you have to go. I can't give you anything else. You've learned everything in this team. There's nothing else for you to do. I want you to go somewhere else. And then maybe we'll get to work again together in a few years' time. But you're stuck, and you're going to get stuck here for years if you don't go now. So, don't know. But there's no good times. Maybe stick it out a bit longer, let COVID end. But when you're ready to go, do it in such a way that you can come back. Don't burn any bridges.
That's the struggle, not being qualified yet. I have to
stick it out a bit longer. Just a bit longer. So, yeah. That sounds like a good plan. And then come back. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing was more just a statement on mental health, because I think mental health in the trade is a pretty big thing sometimes. Because I've had moments where I'd finished work. It was an extremely stressful day, and a mate invited me out. And I was like, yeah, that'll be good for me. That will calm me down. Next minute I'm in the car, I'm just like, I shouldn't be driving. So, and I think another moment where I did get my mate a job with us, and he's been with us for a while, and we've just had that bond which joins together the whole, working well in a team and just having that connection with someone else and stuff like that. And we've had a day where both of us were working together. Had a horrible day. We went back to his house and we were literally talking about work for an hour and a half. Didn't go to the boss about any of that, but it was just the idea of just having that someone in the workforce that you can relate to is a pretty big thing. Hence, we've got another person on now, and they get that being in a group chat that the boss is in is not a good thing. So we've started one on the side where we can literally just, stress-free, just, plot whatever down in that. So. Yeah.
I saw something on the news this week, a guy who's set up a mobile barber shop in a small caravan, a bloke, specifically targeting haircuts for tradies, and he's going to move around, and he's just really trying to address the mental health of tradies, predominantly men, I guess is what he's targeting, and just trying to... when you're having a haircut, you just tell your life story. I don't know what it is about the hairdresser. And he's really tapping into that. It was a great little thing on the news earlier this week. That too. I should give you his number. But I think there's so much in that need to... some line between venting in a healthy way and gossip. There's some line in that, isn't there, that we have to have somebody we can go to in any situation, and then know when it's time to stop talking about it and not bring it into work.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So my question is on caring for staff. At what point do you reckon we stop caring for staff as an employee as compared to a person? And I think that as Christians it makes it a bit harder because we want to care more. But also working in retail previously, you're on the clock half the time, and if you're spending too long caring for someone, people start raising questions. So where do you reckon the line is?
So personally, I think one of the strengths in my leadership is that everyone that works with me and for me is a human being. And I actually think that's really important to acknowledge. Having said that, the hardest thing when I joined the partnership, all of a sudden there are all these rules. I'm an employer, so I'm not allowed, I use the term not allowed to fraternise with the staff. But there are very hard lines there legally that I have to manage. Again, I don't let the lines impact how I engage with my people. I don't let the lines... they are still human beings with emotions, with mental health issues or, demands at home, demands in the workplace. It's the same with my clients as well. And I think that's the skill of having... it's such a great strength that a Christian has, that God has made every single one of his people on this earth, and therefore I'm interested in that person and I want to hear that person so that I can think about how best to work with that person.
I think there's something really important as a manager and a colleague, but especially as a manager, in being trustworthy, so that I spend a lot of effort getting to know my staff individually, and not everyone wants to share at work, but know enough that if there's something going on at home, they're in the middle of a divorce or whatever, something's going on, that I know, and that they know that I'm not going to gossip about that, which comes back to this gossip thing. Maybe it's a female thing, but maybe we tend to stand around gossiping more. I don't know, or maybe everybody does. But making sure they know that that's not the kind of person I am at work, and not the kind of manager I am, so that I know that they can trust me, and that they can also trust that we will separate that a bit from work, and they can say to me, look, I just can't come in today, it's my turn to take the kids and it's a bit of a mess, but I'll make it up on the weekend, that I'm going to be flexible around these issues that are going on in their life, and yet balance that with, well, that's totally fine, but making sure the work's going to get done as well. So there is a line there the work still needs to get done. Or sometimes people have things going on in their life and they have to start thinking about dropping hours and stuff because the work isn't going to get done. But again, they've got to really trust that they can have that conversation with you, and you're going to make something flexible work so that they can continue working but deal with these things going on. And also let you know if it's just something really small. I didn't sleep at all last night, do you mind if I go home early? And everyone's okay with that? Not making you slog it out when you're actually just staring at the screen and I'd rather you be home. So there's something in that sort of trust, I think.
I think it goes back to that point I made earlier about building up relationships. Building up relationships with everybody is really important. Part of building that relationship is that you get to know somebody, and as Lara's already said, not the absolute intricate, intimate ins and outs of their lives, but enough to know how their general work performance is. And if that work performance starts to be a bit awkward or difficult or not performing properly in a certain situation, that you know enough about them to sort of draw them aside, like your friend did, Michael, say, come on, it's time we had a coffee and have a chat. For me, it's very important in my work that and in my business that we build up relationships with our clients, and I don't care how long my staff spend with a client. It's important that that client feels cared for, and I think that's how I've always run my business. That there's no time limit on what it is that you do to make our client feel okay. And there's no limit to what I can do for my staff to make them feel okay. And that's just the way it is. And it may not be like that with everybody, and I know in retailing it's not. I know that. But that's just always the way that I've operated. And I think going to Sandy's point that, we are all God's children. We are all God's beings. And that was sheeted home to me so clearly when I worked in the drug and alcohol rehab situation. It was not an easy job. And, we would have people throwing chairs and breaking windows and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But still, that person was God's person. And how do you cope with that when you look at that person as Jesus looked at them? That's how you do that. And that's not easy either. But it gives you a different perspective as to how you speak to people and how you treat them.
We've got time for one more question. Well, there's two more questions, so maybe we'll have one panel answer only. So whoever jumps in first.
Sorry, just quickly. I did have my hand up before and follow on to the previous question, but since then, I think you've partly answered it, Lara, because one of the things where I often feel guilty as a Christian, is where is the balance between a certain amount of internal debriefing and gossip? And I just think, there is situations where you need to talk to someone at work or you're venting, and then you think, oh, have I just gone too far with that? But, like I said, you've partly touched on that.
Yeah, and I think it's, for me, I'm a real oversharer. So I have to think this through quite carefully, and if so, I have to really, and I am an oversharer with my own life and not with other people's lives, and that's such a difference. So if people have told me things, that stays with me. But if I'm telling a story about, I'll just tell the whole team why I'm not coming in tomorrow, or why I'm not, like, don't talk to me, I had no sleep last night, the dog woke me up, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm happy to have those conversations. But the gossip thing, for me over the years, is about who you're talking to and how many people. So I usually try to make sure in any work environment I have one person that I will go to vent, and that's it, so that whatever I'm offloading sits just with me and that one person, and I haven't done it with that person, then a different story with some other person the next week, and then, you know, it's suddenly, and often if it's around the same situation, just picking one person that's my debriefer. But even in those conversations, really still being careful that what I'm saying is just a kind of dump of how I'm feeling, not extrapolating. And then I bet they're also talking about me, and I bet this is also happening and this other stuff, and it's not this gossipy inventing so far from the truth that it's got nothing to do with the situation anymore. So just keeping the conversation tight and to the specific incident that upset me or whatever, not expanding on it, and being really careful with the words that I use. But having a safe spot. And sometimes if it's a really toxic culture, the safest spot is not in that workplace at all. It's someone else that might have worked with you before or knows about your work environment, that you can be really frank with them and they're not involved at all, and that's much better, and just not buy into the gossiping and the conversations in that toxic place at all, but find a completely separate place to download.
Maybe a question for Michael, but as a Christian in the workplace, the role of Christian witness and sharing your faith in the workplace, and what place there is for that in modern day Canberra.
And some workplaces are tighter on that than others, I think. I think this is where conduct is so important in the workplace as a Christian. And I don't know if you guys have been attending the Bible studies with church and looking at the hope scriptures, but so many of those scripture verses that we've been looking at, those passages on hope, come back to your conduct is really important because of the hope. And so I think we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. I think conduct in the workplace is important because it's an example, and I think that Pauline idea of, you know, you are different, you are dealing with things differently, why is that? And then you can give an example of faith. So I think there's that sense of having to earn your right. I've worked with some Christians, sadly, who are all too willing to tell their faith up front, and then their conduct has not matched up to it, and it's been quite destructive. I think there's also the element of power. When you're in a management role, you need to be very conscious of that. We all do. And what are we doing with the power that we have? And are we unduly influencing someone in that role? But I think it's quite appropriate to say, I go to church on a weekend. This is what I've done. This is, what I talk to. And sometimes opportunities come up. But I think be very, very careful about that power imbalance.
Yeah, there's just
one more
question online, but I'm not sure. I think it might be one that we'll kind of roll over to a later discussion. It's a fantastic question, but it's probably a bit beyond this. So, a question for those who work in government. As a Christian, what would you say is the point of government?
You can take that, Lara.
Well, yeah, I think the answer's too big. I think that's great to tie into those future discussions around the political sphere and government and.
Yes, and we do have someone in the church who has a PhD in political philosophy.
There you go.
So, John, if you're watching...
John, you've been dobbed in.
It's a great question.
What we wanted to do to finish off tonight, we wanted to end this difficult discussion on a really positive note. because all of us love our jobs and have been very blessed with the work that we've done. Not all day, every day, loving it, but on the whole, and most weeks, really fortunate enough to love our jobs. So what has been one great thing or rewarding thing about being a Christian at work, or how your faith has integrated well with your work, or a great story, just to finish on a positive note about being a Christian at work?
So I think for me, I'd say the ability that I've had to demonstrate to others that that they are God's person here on earth, and then I've had, just my work alone allows me to work on fantastic programs, say here in government, whether that's with really vulnerable people, disabilities or aged care, or I've had amazing opportunities which have allowed me to express my joy and desire to see success brought to those vulnerable people.
I would say that probably my greatest joy is just to be serving. I mean, I've always been in a serving situation. People are my great joy, and it's been a fantastic journey all the way along. Yes, there have been ups and downs. Yes, we've weathered great storms, but the God of our faith is there too, weathering the storms, and that's been a great joy. When times have been really tough and I'm yelling and screaming and fingernails are down to the quick, and I'm awake at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering how can we weather this GFC storm? What is going to happen here? How do we weather, 6, 12, 9, 15 weeks of closure? How do we do this? And then I'm just reminded that I'm with you even unto the end. And it's fabulous. It reopens, and it's worthwhile, and it's a joy. Just is a joy.
I think when I think of that sort of question, I think about when I became a Christian as a teenager, and just understanding that compared to God, I'm fundamentally flawed. And yet I've been put in positions of leadership, and I come with that frailty. So when I have conversations with people, I know always in the back of my mind that I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm working with someone else who's not perfect. And in that sort of realising and being humbled before God, you can actually lead quite powerfully, I think, and realising that you can walk alongside people in whatever stage they're in. And I've found that very, very rewarding over the years in management. But I'm a manager who learns by mistakes all the time, as I said before, and I guess I've had the honour of just being able to learn by those mistakes and keep improving, and then to be able to lead others. And I'm just thankful to God for that.
I was reflecting on how much over the years I've enjoyed praying for my leaders and my bosses, and the difficult ones and the great ones. And I was involved in a great lunchtime prayer group in Belconnen, and there is one now in Woden, but they meet on a day where I work from home, so I haven't been able to join it, and I miss it so much, because there's so many of these issues that we're talking about and things that we can't fix and we're stuck with, and to take some time out every week or fortnight and take that to God and have that burden lifted off me, that I don't have to fix everything in my team, I don't have to fix everything in this department, I don't have to have all the answers to this policy and how to make it work, because God is in control, and God has all the answers. And I've found that such a comfort to meet with other Christians in my workplaces and take the tough stuff to God and lift that off me. And I don't know what non-Christians do about that. There's nowhere for them to really to have that sense of perspective, that God is bigger than these little spreadsheet that we can't get to work or whatever, that God is bigger than that. So on that note, maybe we'll just close in prayer. I opened. Would anyone like to close?
I can pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of work. We thank you that it was there back in Genesis. And so, Father, we pray that as we wrestle with issues of what it is to be a Christian at work, that you would, by your Spirit, empower us to be effective Christians in the workplace. Lord, convict us of those areas where we could do better and show us ways to get there. And Lord, in all we do, help us to be kind and compassionate and to display all the fruits of the Spirit in all we do. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you to those who joined us online as well. Ryan's put a few of these sheets out if you want to suggest any topics for next year, or feel free to email us or Chris at the office. We'll still be aiming for one a term next year, and we try to have the speaker come from within the Good Shepherd, one of the congregations. So if you want to dob someone in as being an expert, please do. Thanks very much. Thanks to Josiah, and was someone else helping? Gwills disappeared for doing the live streaming for us tonight too. And thank you to our excellent panel for the time you've taken tonight, but in the weeks to prepare your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.